A sloth, a donkey, and a curious human. Send a prompt and see what they're doing. One hits record with a question on his mind. Two brothers pick it up, see what they find. Corn takes his time, Herman's got the facts. Back and forth, they never hold back. My weird prompts, come on in, that's where we begin. My weird prompts, glad you're here.
This episode was generated using artificial intelligence. Please verify facts.
My Weird Prompts is a community-driven initiative exploring how AI can fuel curiosity and uncover the fascinating ways our world works. GPU compute for this podcast is generously provided by Modal. Learn more at modal.com.
Welcome to this special situational report from My Weird Prompts. It is Friday, March 27th, 2026, and the time is 1846, Coordinated Universal Time. I am Korn, and today we are convening a panel of experts to break down a series of high-stakes escalations that have fundamentally shifted the landscape of the current conflict in the Middle East. Within the last 24 hours, we have seen direct strikes on Iranian nuclear infrastructure, a widening strategic rift between the United States executive branch and Israeli leadership, and a declared blockade of the Strait of Hormuz, one of the world's most critical maritime choke points. This is a moment of profound volatility, perhaps the most dangerous window we have seen since the opening of the air campaign. Joining me to make sense of these developments are our regular correspondents. We have Bernard Higglebottom on the military and security beat, Herman Poppleberry tracking the diplomatic front and strategic analysis, and Dorothy providing our humanitarian picture and systemic risk assessment. Bernard, Herman, Dorothy, thank you for being here on such a heavy day.
Good to be here, Korn. There is a lot of hardware moving today, and the logistics are starting to tell a very different story than the official briefings.
The policy shifts are equally significant. Korn. We are seeing the framework of the post-war order being tested in real time, and the cracks in the coalition are becoming impossible to ignore.
And the human cost is mounting in ways the international community is simply not prepared for. We are looking at systemic failures across multiple borders.
We will get to all of those details shortly. To set the scene for our listeners, the trajectory of this conflict has taken a sharp turn toward direct confrontation with Iranian state infrastructure. For weeks, the focus was on proxies and regional skirmishes, but the morning of March 27th saw precision strikes on the Ardakan uranium processing plant in Yaz province and the Arak heavy water facility. These are not just tactical targets, they're the crown jewels of the Iranian nuclear program. Meanwhile, the diplomatic relationship between Washington and Jerusalem is showing visible cracks, and the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps has made a move that could send shockwaves through the global economy by declaring the Strait of Hormuz closed. Bernard, let us start with the military situation. These strikes on Ardakan and Arak represent a massive escalation. What do we know about the operational details and the confirmation from the ground?
Korn. These strikes were surgical, high-altitude operations involving a combination of United States and Israeli assets. According to reports confirmed by the Atomic Energy Organization of Iran, the Ardakan uranium processing plant and the Arak heavy water facility were both hit in coordinated waves. From a military standpoint, Ardakan is critical because it is where yellow cake is converted into uranium tetrafluoride. Taking that off the board disrupts the entire fuel cycle. Arak, on the other hand, is a heavy water site, which has long been a point of contention regarding potential plutonium production. Preliminary battle damage assessments suggest that while the structural damage to the primary processing halls is extensive, there has been no reported radioactive leakage. This suggests the use of specialized earth-penetrating munitions, likely the GBU-57 or advanced variants of the BLU-109, designed to collapse internal infrastructure without breaching the primary containment of sensitive materials. It is a very difficult needle to thread, and it indicates a high level of confidence in the intelligence regarding the facility layouts.
Bernard, if I could jump in there, the diplomatic fallout of hitting those specific sites is already being felt in Vienna. The International Atomic Energy Agency is scrambling for access, and there is a sense that the red lines of the last decade have been completely erased. Does your data suggest these were purely kinetic strikes? Or was there a cyber component involved to disable the cooling systems or sensors beforehand?
It is highly likely there was a multi-domain approach, Herman. We saw similar patterns in the early stages of the air campaign, where electronic warfare units jammed regional radar, while cyber assets blinded the internal monitoring systems of the target sites. But what is more striking to me as a veteran of these types of conflicts is the elimination of the leadership. We have confirmation from Central Command and regional sources that Ali Reza Tansiri, the commander of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy, and Behnam Rezai, the head of Navy intelligence, were killed in a strike on Bandar Abbas. Tansiri was the architect of Iran's asymmetric naval strategy in the Persian Gulf. He was the man who pioneered the use of fast attack swarms and suicide drones. Losing him right as they declare a blockade of the Strait of Hormuz is a massive blow to their command and control. It is like taking the queen off the board right as the endgame begins.
Bernard, that leads into a very significant piece of information that leaked from the Pentagon today. We are 28 days into this air campaign, with over 10,000 strikes recorded across the theater. Yet, a leaked assessment suggests only 1/3 of Iran's missile and drone arsenal has been confirmed destroyed. How is that possible after such an intense bombardment?
This is the 33% problem, Korn, and it is something I've seen before in theaters like the Balkans and during the initial push into Iraq, though on a much larger scale here. Iran has spent decades building what they call missile cities. These are deep, hardened underground complexes carved into the Zagros Mountains. You can hit the launch pads, you can hit the radar arrays, and you can hit the known warehouses, but the vast majority of their mobile launchers and stockpiles are buried under hundreds of feet of granite. The Pentagon assessment says another 33% of the arsenal is in an unclear status, meaning they are likely hidden in these hardened sites or moved to civilian adjacent areas. This is why the United States has already expended over 850 Tomahawk missiles. We are burning through our inventory of precision-guided munitions at a rate that is making the logistics officers in the Pentagon very nervous. You cannot win a war of attrition against a mountain range with just cruise missiles. We are reaching a point where the depth of our magazine is being questioned.
Bernard, you mentioned the strikes in Bandar Abbas and the nuclear sites, but what about the civilian infrastructure? We are hearing reports of tunnels under churches and weapons caches in schools in South Lebanon. How does that factor into the military's assessment of success?
That is correct, Dorothy. In the Lebanon theater, the Israeli Defense Forces have pushed Hezbollah back from the immediate border zone. During these clearing operations, they discovered a significant weapons cache inside a school and a tunnel network beneath a church. Tactically, this push has been successful in one specific metric. It has extended the rocket warning times for Israeli border towns by 15 to 30 seconds. That might not sound like much, but it is the difference between getting to a shelter and being caught in the open. However, as you are likely going to point out, the proximity of these military assets to civilian sites makes the collateral damage risks extreme. The military sees it as a necessity to clear these caches, but the optics and the human reality are devastating.
Before we move to Herman, Bernard, I want to touch on the regional counterstrikes. We saw Iranian missiles hitting Kuwaiti ports and a barrage targeting the United Arab Emirates. How did the air defenses hold up?
It was a mixed bag. In the United Arab Emirates, the defense systems were highly effective, intercepting 6 ballistic missiles and 9 drones. The integration of United States and Emirati systems is working well. However, Kuwait took a hit. The Shuaik port and the Mubarak al-Kabir port both sustained damage from drone and missile strikes. This is Iran's way of telling the regional players that if they provide basing or support for United States and Israeli operations, their economic lifeblood is at risk. It is a classic horizontal escalation strategy. They cannot hit the carrier groups easily, so they hit the ports that feed the global supply chain.
Thank you, Bernard. Herman, let us pivot to the diplomatic front. There is a reported rift between United States Vice President J.D. Vance and Prime Minister Netanyahu. A leaked call suggests Vance is accusing the Prime Minister of overselling the ease of this conflict. What is the context there, and how reliable is this leak?
Korn, this is a significant shift in the administration's tone. While the call is technically leaked and not officially verified by the State Department, the details align perfectly with the growing frustration we are seeing in the West Wing. Vice President Vance has been taking an increasingly prominent role in the National Security Council, and this leaked call reveals a deep frustration. Vance reportedly told Netanyahu that the administration was sold on the idea of an easy war, a short, sharp campaign that would lead to rapid regime change in Tehran. Instead, as Bernard noted, we are a month in, the Iranian arsenal is largely intact, and the costs are spiraling. Vance is essentially accusing the Israelis of strategic overpromise. There is even a theory circulating in Washington that certain elements, perhaps within the intelligence community, or even foreign actors, are running an operation to undermine Vance by painting him as insufficiently hawkish or as a liability to the alliance. But the reality is that Vance is looking at the data. He is seeing the depletion of Tomahawk stocks and the lack of a clear endgame, and he is pushing for a diplomatic off-ramp before the United States is pulled into a ground war.
Does this rift affect the new proposal for Gaza? We are seeing mentions of a board of peace and an 8-month timeline. Is that a unified front, or more evidence of the split?
The Board of Peace is a United States-backed initiative that represents a more structured approach to the post-conflict phase in Gaza, but it is fraught with tension. The proposal outlines an 8-month phase disarmament of Hamas and Islamic Jihad. The key terms include the total destruction of all remaining tunnels and the transfer of governance to a body called the National Committee for the Administration of Gaza, or the NCAG. The catch, and it is a big one, is that the Israeli Defense Forces will only withdraw upon full verification of a weapon-free Gaza. This is a very high bar for success. Many in the international community are skeptical that such verification is even possible given the complexity of the tunnel networks Bernard mentioned. It feels like a plan designed to fail or to justify a semi-permanent presence.
Herman, if I can interject, the humanitarian community is looking at that 8-month timeline with absolute dread. 8 months of continued military presence and verification operations means 8 more months of restricted aid, destroyed infrastructure, and civilian displacement. How does the Board of Peace plan to address the immediate needs of the population?
That is the friction point, Dorothy. The plan is heavy on security and light on immediate humanitarian logistics. This is part of why we are seeing G7 ministers pressing Secretary of State Marco Rubio for a definitive exit strategy. The international community, especially the Europeans, are terrified of a permanent occupation under the guise of an 8-month verification window. They want to know what the endgame is for both Gaza and the broader conflict with Iran. Rubio is trying to hold the line, but the pressure is mounting.
And there is also some movement at the United Nations that is causing a stir, specifically the appointment of Zina Jalad. Why is this becoming a flashpoint?
That is a very controversial development. The United Nations Rights Council is poised to appoint Zina Jalad as a special rapporteur. Jalad has a history of very pointed rhetoric, having previously described Hamas as a resistance movement and calling for the expulsion of Israel from international bodies. Her appointment to a role overseeing unilateral coercive measures, which is essentially the study of the impact of sanctions, is being seen by the United States and Israel as a direct provocation. It signals that while the United States is trying to manage the conflict, the diplomatic environment at the United Nations is becoming increasingly hostile to the coalition's objectives. It is a sign that the global consensus is fracturing.
Herman, you mentioned an Israeli operation to undermine Vice President Vance. Can you elaborate on that? Is there evidence, or is it just Beltway speculation?
There is a suspicion among some United States officials that the leak of the Vance-Netanyahu call was intentional, designed to force the vice president's hand or to make his position untenable by making him look weak on Iran to the domestic audience. It is a high-stakes game of political theater. Vance is trying to pivot toward a ceasefire and a more realistic assessment of what can be achieved through air power alone, while the Israeli leadership is doubling down on the need to expand the target list to include the very nuclear sites we saw hit today. It is a fundamental disagreement over the definition of victory. One side sees victory as containment, the other sees it as the total dismantling of the Iranian threat, regardless of the cost.
Dorothy, let us bring you in here. You have been tracking the humanitarian situation and the broader systemic risks. The Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps has declared the Strait of Hormuz closed. What does that mean for the world beyond the immediate conflict zone?
Corn. It is a nightmare scenario for global stability. The Strait of Hormuz is the world's most important oil transit point, with roughly 20% of the world's petroleum passing through it. Even if the Iranian Navy cannot physically block every ship, and Bernard can speak to their functional capability, the mere declaration has sent insurance markets into a tailspin. We are looking at a potential global energy shock that could dwarf anything we saw in the 20th century. But the risk is not just economic. The Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps has threatened harsh measures against any transit by allies of what they call the Israeli-American enemies. This sets the stage for a massive naval escalation, if the United States Navy attempts to break the blockade. We are talking about the potential for a direct maritime war.
Dorothy, if I could briefly add a military perspective to that. The Iranian Navy under Tangsiri was built for this exact moment. They do not need a traditional fleet. They use swarms of fast attack craft, sea mines, and shore-based anti-ship missiles hidden in those mountain tunnels. It is not about a traditional naval blockade where you line up ships. It is about making the cost of transit so high in terms of risk that no commercial vessel will enter the area. They only need to sink one tanker to effectively close the strait to commercial traffic.
Exactly, Bernard. And that leads directly into the humanitarian crisis inside Iran. The United Nations has launched an $80 million appeal to support nearly 2 million refugees within Iran and the surrounding host communities. These people are fleeing both the strikes and the economic collapse. We're also seeing a massive displacement in Lebanon, with over 370,000 children forced from their homes in just the last month. The scale of the displacement is outstripping the ability of aid agencies to respond. We are seeing the total breakdown of social services in these regions.
You also have some disturbing details regarding a strike on a school in Iran. This seems to be a major point of contention for the United Nations.
Yes, United Nations Rights Chief Volker Turk has demanded an investigation into the February 28th strike on the Shajara Tayyibeh school in Minab. He used the term visceral horror to describe the scene. While the military might claim these sites are being used for storage or command, the reality on the ground is a mounting toll of civilian casualties that is fueling intense resentment. This is not just a humanitarian issue, it is a long-term security risk. Every civilian casualty is a recruitment tool for the next generation of militants. The strike in Minab has become a rallying cry across the global south, further isolating the United States and Israel.
And we have seen this conflict spill over into the digital and psychological realm as well, with the breach of FBI Director Kash Patel's personal data. How does that fit into the Iranian strategy?
This was a highly targeted cyber attack by Iran-linked hackers. They breached Director Patel's personal emails and leaked photos and data. It is a classic psychological operation designed to show that no one, not even the head of the FBI, is safe from their reach. It is meant to rattle the leadership in Washington and create a sense of vulnerability. When you combine that with the fact that 78% of Jewish Israelis still support continuing the war despite the civilian casualties in places like Nahariya, you see a world where both sides are digging in for a very long and very ugly confrontation. There is no public appetite for compromise on either side.
That brings us to our crosstalk section. Bernard, you mentioned the 33% attrition rate for the Iranian missile arsenal. From your perspective, does that justify the expansion of the war to finish the job, as some are calling for?
It is a logical trap, Korn. If you stop now, you leave two-thirds of the arsenal intact and ready for a retaliatory strike that could be far worse than what we have seen. From a purely military standpoint, the job is only a third done, but the cost of doing the other two-thirds is exponential. You would need ground forces to clear those mountain complexes, or you would need to use munitions that the United States is currently running low on. So, while I understand the military urge to finish the job, the logistical and strategic reality is that we might be reaching the limit of what air power can achieve. We are at a point of diminishing returns.
But Bernard, that is exactly why Vance is so frustrated. He sees the quagmire. If the military solution is only a third effective after 10,000 strikes, then the military solution is not a solution at all. It is a resource drain. The diplomatic front is trying to find a way to contain the remaining two-thirds of that arsenal through leverage and negotiation, but every time a nuclear site is hit, that leverage disappears because the Iranians feel they have nothing left to lose. They are being pushed into a corner where their only option is total escalation.
And while you two discuss the strategy, the people in Minab and Nahariya are paying the price. Bernard, you talk about precision strikes, but how do you justify the visceral horror at that school? Was that a precision strike, or was it a failure of intelligence?
Dorothy, I've seen the target folders for these types of operations. Often, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps will intentionally co-locate command centers or munition storage in or under civilian buildings like schools and hospitals. It is a cynical but effective tactic. When we hit those targets, the secondary explosions from the stored munitions are often what cause the most damage. I'm not saying it is not a tragedy, but from a security standpoint, leaving a missile control center active just because it is under a school is also a risk to our own forces and allies. It is a choice between two terrible outcomes.
Which brings us back to the Strait of Hormuz. Dorothy, you are very concerned about the blockade, but I would suggest that the declaration might be more of a diplomatic leverage play than a functional reality. Iran knows that actually closing the strait would bring the full weight of the United States Navy down on them. They are using the threat to force a ceasefire.
Herman, the insurance markets do not care if it is a leverage play. They are reacting as if it is real. The price of shipping is skyrocketing, and that translates to higher food and fuel prices for everyone, especially in the developing world. Whether or not a single ship is actually sunk, the damage to the global economy is already being done. You cannot negotiate with a market that is in a state of panic. This is how a regional war becomes a global depression.
It seems we have a fundamental tension here. The military reality suggests a job half done or less. The diplomatic reality shows a coalition that is fraying at the edges, and the humanitarian reality is one of escalating suffering and systemic risk. Bernard, what is the one thing you are watching most closely in the next 48 hours?
I'm watching the carrier strike groups. If the United States moves more naval assets into the Gulf of Oman to challenge the Hormuz Declaration, we will know that the diplomatic off-ramp has been bypassed in favor of a direct maritime confrontation. That would be a point of no return.
Herman, your key indicator.
I am watching the G7. If we see a joint statement that deviates from the United States position or calls for an immediate, unconditional ceasefire, it will be a clear signal that the international coalition is breaking. That would leave the United States and Israel increasingly isolated in their approach to Tehran, which could lead to even more desperate actions.
And Dorothy?
I am watching the refugee flows at the Iranian borders. If we see a sudden surge into Iraq or Turkey, it will indicate that the internal stability of Iran is collapsing faster than the international community can manage. That kind of mass displacement is a recipe for regional chaos that could last for a decade.
This has been a sobering assessment. To synthesize what we have discussed today, the conflict has entered a phase where the core infrastructure of the Iranian state is under direct fire, but the military efficacy of these strikes is being questioned by the very leaders who authorized them. The rift between the United States and Israel, personified by the tension between Vice President Vance and Prime Minister Netanyahu, suggests a lack of alignment on the ultimate goal of this campaign. Meanwhile, the declaration of a blockade in the Strait of Hormuz has moved the conflict from a regional security issue to a global economic threat. We are seeing a pattern of escalation where each tactical move by one side triggers a strategic countermove by the other, with no clear path to de-escalation in sight. The human cost, as Dorothy highlighted, is becoming a central part of the narrative, with the international community struggling to keep pace with the scale of displacement and the horror of civilian casualties. We will continue to track these developments as they unfold. For more in-depth analysis and updates, you can visit myweirdprompts.com or find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and our Telegram channel. Thank you to Bernard Higglebottom, Herman Poppleberry, and Dorothy for their insights today. This has been a situational report for My Weird Prompts. I am Korn, and we will be back with more as the situation warrants. Stay informed and stay safe.
This episode was generated using Gemini Flash 3. Text-to-speech engine was Chatterbox.
Thanks for listening to our show, My Weird Prompts, where our thoughts go from slow takes to facts on cue. We change and follow through. My Weird Prompts, that's the flows from sloth, from man, from long-eared host. My Weird Prompts, until next time, stay curious, keep